evening and taking advantage of the opportunity to be able to hear from Mr. Graham. I know he's the guy you want to hear from, but I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to share this symbol with you that you may have seen in other pieces of our literature, you may not. But really it symbolizes the work that we do here in the district. So whether you look at it kind of from the inside out or outside in, obviously the Greeneview student is the center of our work and what we primarily focus on. But at the same time, in that outer ring, like how we engage with the community, we also know we are a part of a larger community. And so the layers to that, the way in which we partner with parents, the way in which our school culture works within our buildings and within our district. And then kind of this three-prong, I think of this as almost like a wheel, these interchanging kind of parts, where this is how I kind of categorize the work that takes place in our district. So whether it's work associated with facilities, that's associated with the reason why we've engaged the community tonight, or with the operations of our district, well, those two pieces, there's a reason the teaching and learning is at the top, is because it all serves really the teaching and learning of our students. And again, within that, there's some education jargon in there, but those teaching and learning pieces, again, to support the student in a way that they can have success, not just in our district, but also post-graduation. So I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to kind of share that with you before we segue into what really is focused on all three of those pieces, teaching and learning, facilities, and operations. Mr. Graham, thank you for taking the time this evening to talk about property taxes, but also tax levies, and just general operations of how that can impact school. I think at the end too, it might be an opportunity for questions, but we,
I can answer questions.
And we'd also be happy to answer questions. We do have a mailer that should have hit your homes already that are on the chairs. You're certainly welcome if you would like to get an overall view of the March 19th ballot issue, which is part of the reason of why also we asked Mr. Graham to join us. So without further ado, sir, thank you for coming.
Certainly. All right, so it is going to be informal. If you have a question while we're going, don't hesitate to stop me. If it's something we're going to get to later, I'll tell you, hold off, see if I answer your question then. But we're a small enough group, hopefully everybody can hear me without a microphone. Am I good in the back? Up a little more, okay, well, you can tell I have grandkids now instead of children, so my outdoor voice has gotten softer. I don't yell nearly as much. So we all know property taxes are the most hated of all of the taxes. Oops, did I jump too far?
Might be back one. I think it's slipped back.
Okay. Primarily because you can't control it. Yes, you get to vote on levies, but you can't control the value of your property. Okay, that is a big deal because that is part of the equation. Of course, taxes are value times rate equals tax. Now, yes, we have credits that we can subtract. The value is not, or the tax is not associated with the services you receive. You know, how many times do I hear, I don't have kids in the school, why do I have to pay for schools? Of course, my patent answer is always, well, when you were going to school, there was somebody who didn't have kids in school that were paying for you to go to school. This is the process, this is the way we fund schools in Ohio. And they're not based on your ability to pay. The number of people I talk to, you're going to tax me out of my house. I can't afford this. I'm on Social Security. You are taking my entire Social Security check to pay the property taxes. I get all these things. You have to remember, taxes aren't personal to me. I have a job to appraise properties based on market conditions. Everything after that is simple math. Value times rate equals tax. So why do we use property taxes even though they're so hated? It's because they provide a stable source of income. Back when we hit the recession, the subdivision that we had that was doing the best was the city of Beaver Creek. Why? They don't have an income tax. They didn't rely on sales tax. County was hurting. We lost a ton of sales tax dollars. Anybody who relied on income tax, they were hurting. They saw their incomes going down. And guess what? When recessions hit, that usually puts a greater demand on government services, not less demand. So property taxes provide that even keel of revenue, and we'll kind of see why through some of the slides. So kind of what we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about the valuation and the process that we use to arrive at the value. We're going to talk about the different types of levies and how value changes impact those levies. We're going to talk about the relativity of taxes, or the equalization process. We can't talk about property taxes without talking about the 20 mil floor. We're going to have some slides. I am on a select group of county auditors who are working with legislators to come up with solutions to not our valuation problem, but our tax problem. And so we're going to go through some of our association solutions and some that aren't our solutions, but I won't, I want to provide as broad of a base as I can without saying, well, this is what's best for you. What is it, Larry? Hey, I'm from government. I'm here to help you. Does anybody feel good when they hear that? Yeah, probably not. We'll talk about tax credits, and we'll talk about a little bit about the appeal process that you can go through if you disagree with your property value. Notice I said property value, not property taxes. That's a mathematical equation. So why do we reappraise properties? State constitution requires us to base taxes on a fair and equitable method. That means I have to have values to determine what those taxes are. And if you have two houses that are identical in every way, they should have equal value. The fact that I paid $110,000 for my house, my neighbor paid $100,000, and their neighbor paid $90,000 for three identical houses, doesn't mean that's the value for each of those properties. The sales price is used as an averaging function, so I would tell you that each of those three houses is worth $100,000. That's the equalization process, not chasing the individual sale. Property values are updated every 3 years. 3 years ago, I made the mistake in my letter, and I said, we are doing our sexennial reappraisal. We are required under statute to reappraise every property every 6 years. Which is true, but we're also required to do a triennial update at the midpoint of that reappraisal cycle. So when I did our triennial update letter, and I said, we are statutorily required to do a triennial update at the midpoint, and everybody calls and says, wait a minute, your last letter said you only update values every 6 years. Like, that's not really what it said, but the next letters will be very clear that, yes, while we update every 3 years. So the difference between a reappraisal and a triennial update, a reappraisal, we're actually assessing the condition of the property, the changes in maybe the neighborhood, what was the up-and-coming neighborhood 10 years ago may not be now. Those houses may have been selling at a premium 10 years ago, but now they become yesterday's news because there's this brand new neighborhood over here that everybody wants to live in. We've got one of my favorites is in the 70s, for whatever reason, split levels became all the rage. People wanted to have to go upstairs regardless of where they went in their house. I don't get it, but it was really popular. Today, those are probably the hardest ones on the market to sell because people realize, wow, going up and down stairs all the time isn't nearly as nice as what it was when it's like, okay, the kids have this area, I'm going over here. 2 different levels, 2 different TVs, whatever. But so we look at things like that. What is driving the market? So a triennial update is different in that we are just looking at a neighborhood area and saying, on average, the sales in this neighborhood are 84% of the auditor's value. I know I have to get that number back up to between 92 and 95%. So I have to increase everybody's value across the board in that neighborhood by a percentage to get within that area that the Department of Tax Equalization requires that I be in when I value properties. I did not state that well, so if there are questions. Okay, we also update values annually through new construction. You build a new house, we're going to come out and appraise it. We also validate sales that occurred. So, for 20 years, I've been sending out data mailers. Every reappraisal cycle, we send out a data mailer and say, hey, here's the information we have on your house. Please update it and make sure it's accurate. Basement, yes. Finished area, 0. The number of people who do not return the form or lie to me on the form and say, no, we don't have any finished basement. Why would you want to tell the auditor you have finished basement? He's only going to raise your value. Just throw that paper away. That's not important. So what we do is when a property sells, we go out on Zillow, Redfin, or whatever, and we look at pictures of the interior and go, oh, well, look at that. That basement is finished. Oh, and they put in granite countertops. They've redone the entire kitchen. It looks really nice. We need to update our data based on that information that we receive. Back in the day, we sent appraisers out door to door, knocking on doors. It became very ineffective because nobody was ever home. You're working the same hours our appraisers are working. And today, it's even scarier because there have been cases where appraisers have been kidnapped. You're on my property, you have no business holding them at gunpoint. It's the day, so we don't go out and do that. We use a lot more technology. We have to make certain assumptions. So that's kind of the update cycle. So we have to consider what factors do we look at. And this is not an extensive list. There are more factors, but location is still the #1 thing. You take a 1,100 square foot, 1 bathroom house and put it in Xenia. In today's market, it's worth $130, $150. Put it in Yellow Springs, it's $220. Why? Location. Location matters. Obviously, things like square footage, age, bathroom count, lot size, these are all, again, style. My wife and I, we had 4 kids. We had a 2-story house, 4 bedrooms. All the bedrooms are upstairs. I don't like a 2-story house anymore. Though I will say my wife hates the 2-story house because I'm too lazy to take my shoes off upstairs every time I take them off. So I'll have 3 or 4 pairs of shoes in the living room, which drives her nuts. But these are things that it's style or how many floors matters because your price per square foot, if you're on a single level, is going to be higher than if you're on a 2-story. Okay, the cost to build it was higher. The desire to have it is more. So the cost per square foot. So when people always want to come in and say, well, my neighbor's house, you have it appraised at X, and you have me at Y, but we have the same square footage, and you pull up a picture, and you're like, yeah, they're in a 2-story. Don't compare yourself to a 2-story. Look for similar type properties. Subjective factors. Now, these are the ones even I struggle with, and I rely on my appraisers because they are the experts at it. But we have the grade, which is the quality of construction. Over by the base, there's an area in Fairborn. After World War II, most of the houses in this small area were built with the crate wood from stuff that was shipped into the base. Not the highest quality of material to build a house with. So that is one factor. We also look at the gingerbread effect. Do you have a bay window? One of the arguments I had with one of our appraisers is, we were talking about grade, and I said, it looks like a C to me, and he goes, no, it's a C+. I said, how's it a C+? It's just like every other. It's a rectangular house. It's a C. Because it's got a hip roof. Okay, I know a hip roof costs more to build, but is that second buyer really going to care that it's a hip roof? Things that, they get into, I personally still think I'm right. I think it's a C house, but my mother got stuck with a C+ anyways. So we got CDU, condition, desirability, and usability. Now we usually focus on condition. Has the house been kept up? My grandfather's house hasn't been updated since 1962. That's a condition issue. Is it in fair? Is it in poor? It's certainly below average. So those are their judgment calls that our appraisers have to make. Guess what? It's really hard to make when we don't get inside your house. These are areas where if you want to contest your value, I'm not saying, guess what? Most people don't have granite countertops. In my neighborhood, that is not the standard, okay? But they do exist. And if you live in that neighborhood where granite countertops are the standard, and you still have the, Formica countertops, that's something that you might want to let us know. My grandfather still has a powder pink tub, powder pink commode. Must have had to replace the sink. It is white, and apparently they didn't make powder pink at the time that he needed to replace it. So, but it's not just condition, it could also be desirability. At one point, living on Fairfield Road would not have been a major issue. Anybody want to live on Fairfield Road today? No. Why? It's less desirable. Now, if you live one street back from Fairfield, you're in that same neighborhood, but you have a much more desirable house because, well, you don't have to worry about getting run over when you back out of your driveway. A kind of new thing that we've started with is effective age. Now, we've done this because we're seeing a lot of properties that are being flipped. So somebody buys a property for $80,000. They come in and put a new kitchen appliances, new kitchen cabinets, countertop, wood floors, redo the bathroom, and all of a sudden that $80,000 house is now selling for $210,000. So effective age is one of those ways that we can say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a 1969 three-bedroom brick ranch anymore. This is a little better than that. Now, it doesn't mean we bring the effective age up to today's standards because it probably still has the old plumbing. There are parts of it that are still on that base, but that's a way that we can say, look, it's more than just a change in the condition. It's more than that. So our appraisal approach is mass appraisal. It's imperfect. It's far from perfect. What happens is we have a computer model based on all the data we gather that predicts the most likely sales price for a property. Then what we do is we look at what actual sales did occur and how close is our value to those actual sales. And we adjust our model so that it comes in within what we consider to be reason of that value. So some of the limitations we've already talked about, we don't get inside your property. We have limited data. My wife and I got new windows probably 5-7 years ago. If you want to know what company not to get windows from, talk to me after this. But is that going to help our house sell for more? Absolutely. Do I have a factor in my computer model that says, what's the age of the windows? No. We assume it has windows, and if it has windows, we assume they're functioning. So, again, limited data, inability to determine the interior finish. A buddy of mine used to invite me over to play poker 3 or 4 times a year. We'd go to his unfinished basement. I have not been invited to his house in over 5 years now. My assumption is he's finished his basement. I'm thinking I'm a bad enough poker player. Certainly I'm not scaring him from inviting me. So there are benefits to the mass appraisal approach, and the number one is cost. I have never seen a fee appraisal done for less than $250. I'm paying about $20 a parcel. It's the approach. It's the statistical approach. And just like any other statistical approach, if you get it 95% right, you're doing pretty good. So, it's one of those, we know that there are bad values out there, and we count on you, taxpayers, to come and say, whoa, wait a minute, where did you come up with this? And like I said, I don't want to haggle over $5,000, but we have values out there. One of the big things we will miss is you have a house that has a cathedral ceiling. We didn't get inside. We don't know the second floor is not finished, but when you look at it from the outside, it's like, wow, it's got the windows up there. I can't see that there's no floor. So we picked that up as square foot living area. Well, lo and behold, sorry, yeah, let's fix that and we'll move forward. And then time is the other issue. We complete our reappraisal of 79,000 parcels in Greene County in 2 years. And there's no way you could do that doing a fee increase. So now we're going to get a little bit into the weeds on tax levies, but part of the important thing here is, in my world, there's only 2 reasons values change. Reappraisal changes, it's where the value changed because of market conditions, and non-reappraisal changes, which is every other change. Could be new construction, could be demolition, could be the property became exempt. There's a multitude of reasons that values can change for other than market conditions. So again, if I were to think of a reappraisal, hey, the underlying property has not changed. Its physical characteristics are exactly the same. It's just we're updating because people are paying ridiculous amounts for houses right now.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You just said because people are paying ridiculous amounts for houses. And I maintain my property, and we haven't done anything crazy, but because people want to live at the lake, they're paying exorbitant amounts, and then people who are now retired, we're going to get stuck. And when I questioned, I don't know how many years ago, it was before you were on board, I was like, what is this? We had just bought the house, and they were like, well, pinging us for this and that. We're like, we didn't do that stuff, and we haven't done anything. And they asked me in the office if I knew how much lake property was up like a Great Lake. And I was like, well, yes, I do know, because my parents had property on Lake Huron. And I was like, Shawnee Lake is not Lake Huron. And guess what? My property value did not change until you came into office, and there was a readjustment, and it went down to a normal change. But people are paying stupid amounts of money for old houses out here. I don't intend to move. My husband has passed. I'm trying to stay in my home. And this is serious money that you're talking. And why punish the people? Not really punish, but why ping the people that are maintaining when somebody else just has too much money or too much of a line of credit?
So I guess, first of all, my job is to reflect the market. And I understand property taxes aren't fair. I did not raise my son to be an idiot, but my son paid $140,000 for an $80,000 house. Did he do it because I raised him to be stupid, or did he do it because if he was going to move out of my house, which he was going to move out of my house, that's what he had to pay. That's what the market is.
I have a son that just moved from here to Los Angeles. I know about it. Insane.
Yeah.
But I want to stay in my home, and or else maybe could there be like, I don't know, senior citizen value on taxing or something?
So we will talk a little bit about some of the solutions to the problem, because I go back to, we do not have a valuation problem in Ohio. We have a tax problem. And they have to be viewed as 2 separate issues. We'll go through some of the solutions. So if you can kind of hold those thoughts back a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the solutions that have been discussed.
Can we expand on that a second?
Yeah.
So whenever you are raising the value of the house, is there a limitation that you're allowed to raise that property value by in each year or triennial? Is there some type of limitation to keep you from?
No, because value is value. So a value is the opinion of what that property would sell for at a given point in time. By putting a false limit on it, we are not following the state constitution. By saying, okay, well, this house, which is identical to the house you live in, you've lived in your house for 30 years, so your value is this. You just bought this house that's identical, but your value is this because you paid that for it. That's not equal, that would violate the Constitution. Now, I'm not saying we can't talk about changing the Constitution, but that's a different issue.
So, here next year, when the housing market goes to crap, so when you do your triennial, they gonna come back down?
Yes.
I've never seen that.
In 2011, you should have seen that. In 2014, you should have seen it again. Why? Because in 2011, what happened? We had the housing crisis occur in 2008. All the foreclosures. I wasn't auditor at the time, but guess what? Our cycle was we had to appraise properties as of January 1st, 2008. Well, 2007 was a really good real estate market. Maybe you could argue the fourth quarter of 2007 started to fall off, but 2008 is where it fell off the cliff. In 2011, we lowered values, but we had a problem. There were no valid sales out there. Department of Taxation will not let me use a bank sale as a valid sale. I and a number of other auditors said, if that is the majority of your sales, how do you tell me they're not valid? This is what the market is right now. This is a foreclosure market. Obviously, and you've heard me mention Department of Taxation a number of times. Remember, I could lowball the numbers. I could say, you know what, state wants me at 92 to 95, but this market is ridiculous right now. I'm going in at 80 because that's what I think the real value of these properties are when all of this shakes out. They would reject it. And I can prove that they would reject it because Butler County Auditor stuck to his guns and said, Department of Taxation, I think you're wrong and I'm taking you to court. I'm not changing my values. He lost the case, created great case law for the Department of Taxation to keep us under their thumb, and then had to go back those 2 years while that case was being heard and decided and back bill all of the people, even if they didn't own the property during that 2-year period, had to send tax bills back. So it's not one of those, remember, I've got things that, yes, I have control of, but, you know, there's a reason Department of Taxation oversees what we do, because I get elected every 4 years. I said, you know, what's the benefit for me making people mad? And guess what? These valuation letters made a lot of people mad. Yeah. So, you know, there is a reason for the oversight from the Department of Taxation. I don't think it should go away, but ultimately,
I don't want to hold you up, but is there somewhere we can go and see, like for my house, instance, my house went up over $200,000 from last year. Is there something I can look at to see how you come up with that? Like granite countertops and blah, blah, blah?
So you're never going to see granite countertops. What I would recommend is that you get a property record card. You can always come in and see me. Now, my staff does a great job of trying to protect me, but I would most of the time rather talk to a taxpayer than stare at a spreadsheet. If you come talk to me, I can explain how we got there. You can file a complaint. I'll help explain that process. You know, the property record, the property information is actually available on our website, and I always encourage people, review it, make sure our data is correct. If I have that you have 3,500 square feet and you have 2,500 square feet, we've got an issue. We need to send somebody out there to remeasure, and we are using exterior measurements. So if you're measuring the inside of everything, you know, I could.
You said you go on the thing and take a little snoop on the inside of the house too, so.
Only
Zillow.
if it's sold. Only if it's sold. That's the only time I do that. Yes, sir.
When you sent those letters out this year, you gave us a link that we could go around and look at all the houses in our neighborhood. I happen to have done that because I was going to file a complaint. I'm not now because I figured out what the differences are. But you can go out and look at all those other houses, their lot size, their square footage, and what they're appraised at.
The link is still out there. And I encourage you, go look at what values of properties are in your area. You know,
What's killing me is the 1,500-foot houses on one lot that sold for $225,000 right behind me, and I've got 2,300 square feet and 2 lots.
and it's never just one house. It is
Yeah,
the
I know.
overall market. We look at, yes, sir.
I'd like to commend you guys on the website that you guys use. I looked at other counties and the map tool and being able to look at other houses and pulling up information is great. I use that, and I noticed that like the whole neighborhood behind my neighborhood, none of the values even changed $1. So all the little annexation that Jamestown built in 2007 and on, none of those values changed.
That wouldn't be the LIHTC area, would it?
I'm not sure.
Low-income
Yeah,
housing
it's
tax
the
credits?
area.
Is that the low-income housing area in Jamestown?
I'm not sure if that's it, but if you go out Quarry Road and before you get to the last road.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's.
All right,
But
so,
they're building new
Congratulations,
houses there too.
hey, you are preaching to the choir on that one. I think everything should be appraised for what it's worth. And if low-income housing is important to government, then government should exempt a portion of that value so that it's affordable housing. They shouldn't tell me how to appraise it. Guess what? They tell me how to appraise it, and I have to appraise it based on the income approach to valuing property, which means these are people who are paying lower rent because the government's subsidizing, but we use their lower rent to determine their income. It's ridiculous, but it's the law.
Okay, so that neighborhood is across the street from me, so does that impact my value?
No. Are you in a low-income housing program?
Yeah, but people will look at that, and I'm sorry, they might be very nice people, but they'll say, oh, I don't want to. I mean, but I still don't intend to move. That's why I'm here.
But ultimately, the sales are what eventually highlight those things. So, Fairborn Cement has expanded the area where they're blasting and mining. They are closer to a residential area than they've been in quite some time. Those people are all telling me our values are plummeting because of all of this activity. And eventually they may be right. Sales may reflect that. But when I talk to these people and I look at sales that are occurring right there on their road, and I'm like, okay, this one sold for $275, I've got it on for $220. You can't argue that my value is wrong or too high. Well, they don't know what a blasting is going to sound like. They don't understand that it shakes everything, all the dust. And it's like, eventually that will play out in the market. And I will get to see those sales that do impact value. But I don't try to look ahead and say, oh, well, you know what, there's this drug treatment facility that's going in, and that's going to cause everybody to, all these druggies are going to be running in the neighborhood and it's all going to get crazy and nobody's going to want to live here. I have to see it. I can't predict it. And thank you for the questions, because I am going to tell you, this is so much more fun to do than when I just stand up here and talk. So I appreciate any questions you have. As I said, 4 kids, you're not going to hurt my feelings at this point. So why do we see our values increase so dramatically? So I've given you 2 sets of numbers. I used Jamestown Village just because if I used all of Greeneview School District, there's so many different taxing districts that are involved in that. So I just focused on one particular taxing district. Now you can see I've given you numbers for both a 3-year and just the 1 year. Now we focused on just the 1 year. 2022 sales are what we focused on. You'll see in a little bit why the 3-year information is important, and hopefully we have handouts and you can go back and look at, well, you can see it now, that Jamestown Village, we used a 3-year average. Our sales ratio would have been 78%, meaning sales prices our value was 78% of what the sales prices were on average. If we focus just on 2022, which is what the Department of Taxation requires us to do and is the right thing to do, we're at 58%. There are 52 sales in that 1 year in the village. I had to increase values 35% to get up to what was considered acceptable by the Department of Taxation. You can see our county numbers. They kind of reflect the same thing, not quite as dramatic as what the village of Jamestown was, but again, a 31% increase to get us back up to that range versus a what it would have taken if we had used the 3-year of 79%. Like I said, you'll see where the 3-year conversation comes in as we get through this.
So
Now-
with those numbers right there, you're saying the average home in our area here went up 31%.
No, 35% in Jamestown Village, 31% countywide.
That's not what the value of
Well-
the home went up, that's what you had to go up to get to your 90 or 92%, isn't it?
Well, I mean, but again, what's it based on? What is any appraisal? Go back to, an appraisal is opinion of value at a point in time. It doesn't matter whether you use mass appraisal or a fee appraiser. It is based on sales. Anybody who has had an appraisal done, if you look through that appraisal report, what do? They find comparable properties that have sold in your area. Now, again, remember, in this case, it's triennial update, so we didn't do a deep analysis. We just said, in this neighborhood. And remember, a neighborhood is smaller than what you would say a taxing district is. Taxing district is Jamestown Village. Taxing district J27, okay? That's an entire taxing district. Within that taxing district, there are neighborhoods that represent similar homes in a geographical area. Now, Jamestown doesn't have near as many neighborhoods as, say, the city of Xenia, city of Beaver Creek, where, you know, we've got all these different neighborhoods built at different times, all of similar style homes. The hard ones, if you go out into the farm ground, where you have somebody who built a $1.25 million mansion next to the 1800s farmhouse. They're in the same neighborhood because, well, I can't create a separate neighborhood for an individual property. The sales will never be representative of anything. Those are the ones we really struggle with. When you talk about, you know, Shawnee Lake, yes, I understand there are a variety of types of houses and styles, but ultimately, those are a very similar neighborhood. I grew up in New Arrowhead, the state's, what we called it, in Xenia. They're all 3-bedroom brick ranches until the tornado came. You know, now we have a couple of 2-stories thrown in here, there, and yonder, but that's a neighborhood. You can't get any more homogeneous than what that is. Those are really easy to appraise. The $2 million neighborhood, those are really tough because every one of them is custom built for that particular person.
So with those numbers, I'll go back to that. Somehow I'm at 48%. So I don't know how I appraised such a huge number. I'm in a neighborhood like all the rest. Actually, I'm out in the country. I looked up the neighbors. They're kind of a little lower than me. The 2 farm properties, they're down around 27, 28%. So that's a huge variance when I'm still in the same neighborhood. Farm, 27, 28%, me at 48%. That's crazy that my property value went up 48% in 3 years. That's why I was asking earlier if there's some type of leveling, because that's beyond an increase.
Okay, so ultimately, and I get the percentage increase is intolerable. But ultimately, my question to you, and I'm not prepared to debate an individual property value, but ultimately my question is always, what do you think of that appraised value? Does it represent what you could sell your house for? And if your answer is yes, then I say there's nothing I can do for you. Taxes are too high. I'm sorry. This is the process. But if you think your value does not represent what that property would sell for, that's where you need to take that next step.
Well, so I'll wait until later on in your brief. So that's where you sent out the valuations a little bit ago, a few months ago, and said your property value is now this. So probably most of us in the room believe, yeah, there's going to be a tax increase, but we'll see what it is. Well, now all of a sudden we see the tax increase that just come out and hit us, and that's a huge percentage where I think you guys have control over what that percentage, the effective tax rate or whatever the number is, because now I'm paying 33% more this year in taxes than I did last year. who is getting a 33% raise in their taxes to justify that? That's a crazy level of additional tax in 1 year.
I get it, but I am always going to go back to my answer is always, look at, does that value represent what you could sell your property for? And
Okay, so if that value is still the same, all the people kind of went up at that amount. But now all of a sudden, you're drawing in a whole lot of more tax base. You're drawing an extra 33% from me this year compared to what you did last year. So the county gets 33% more money.
well, we'll
in 1
talk
year.
a little bit about taxes. You know, we will get there, I promise.
Okay, that's, yeah, later in the brief, I see it.
So the last thing I'm going to mention is I was waiting for somebody to say yes, but the market is crashing right now. The market's down. The market. So I ran a sales ratio report before I got here. For taxing district J27, our current sales ratio is 88%. So we were at 92%, 93%. We're now down to 88%, meaning sales are still increasing. Countywide, it was 89%. So we went from 95 to 89. So the market is still going up. Yes, it's going up by much less than, I mean, we were seeing over 10% increase per year in sales, prices. Yes?
Can you repeat that again, please?
So in taxing district J27, our sales ratio right now, for sales that occurred from January 1st of 2023 through noon today, our value was 88% of the sales price on average in taxing district J27, which is Jamestown Village. Countywide, that number is 89%. So you can see the market is still increasing, just at a decreasing rate. So now we get into taxes. All right, and I'm going to go so far over if I don't speed up. Okay, so we've got inside millage. Inside millage is easy. Value goes up 10%, taxes go up 10%. Value goes down 10%, taxes go down 10%. Really simple. If all taxes work like this, you wouldn't have to feel like a rocket science to understand property taxes. Benefit is that there's only 10 mills available to any taxing district. 10 mills, it represents a relatively small portion of the total millage. So the average millage in the state of Ohio is 50 mills. So it roughly represents 20% of the millage that is being paid. So, but this is one. If your value went up 30%, you saw your tax revenue on these 10 mills go up, or the subdivision saw the revenue, you saw your expenses go up 10%, period. That's just, it's really straightforward on inside millage. We have fixed sum levies. Fixed sum levies are intended, they are voted levies, so the inside millage isn't voted. It's established back in 1933, and I've wasted so much time already, I won't go through the history lesson. No, Inga, I was not born in 1933. So fixed sum levies generate a specific amount of money. These are primarily bond and emergency levies. Now, Greeneview School District does not have an emergency levy, so we'll focus on the bond levy. When voters approve the bond levy, you approve the Budget Commission to set a tax rate necessary to make the principal and interest payments on that debt. So every year we set that rate to make sure they have enough money to make the principal and interest payments. So because that amount that we're trying to generate is fairly fixed, as values go up, the rate goes down so that it generates the amount of money it needs. Converse is also true. If values were to decrease, you would see the rate increase. What you told Greeneview was that you support that bond levy, and whatever it takes to pay off that debt is what will be levied. Are we good? All right, the third levy, fixed rate levies. This is the most common and the most complex. So these are most of the levies you pay. Your fire levies, your police levies, your road levies. These are the things that, governments come to you for on a regular basis. So now is why values change matters. If your value changed due to a reappraisal change, an effective tax rate is calculated, not determined by the auditor, calculated through a mathematical formula so that that reappraisal change does not result in more or even less revenue. So if the market's increasing, the effective rate goes down, produces the same amount of money. Okay? If the change is due to a non-reappraisal, and new construction is always the easiest way to think of this, there is no impact on that tax rate, and the government gets more money because they've increased the tax base. Now, if you think about this, this is logical. If I run a fire department and I reappraise everybody's property and it goes up 30%, does that mean it costs me 30% more to provide services to the community? No. So that tax rate is reduced so that it generates the same amount of money. However, if a new subdivision goes in, wow, that fire department may have to hire more staff. They need new equipment. They may need specialized equipment. Their expenses are going to go up because new construction occurred, and they get more money from that new construction that occurred. In theory, does that make sense? All right. So, talk about effective rate real quick. So what the effective rate, it's actually you calculate a reduction factor which calculates the effective rate, but in essence it says, what is my percentage change in value caused by reappraisal? And that's the amount I need to adjust last year's rate by in order to equalize the revenue with what it was supposed to generate last year. So all of these fixed rate levies, when reappraisal changes occur, are adjusted for those reappraisal changes so that they generate the same amount of money, and the only revenue they get are for the additional new construction areas. So the Budget Commission doesn't set this. This is a mathematical formula, and it's actually certified to us by the Department of Taxation.
So everybody in the county has the same effective tax rate?
No, absolutely not. Every subdivision, well, I'm not even going to say every subdivision. Let's stick with every subdivision, not make things too complicated. Every subdivision, the effective tax rate they have apply to everybody in that taxing district. Greeneview School District, it doesn't matter if you live in Fayette County and go to Greeneview Schools, you live in Jamestown, you live in Bowersville, that tax rate is the same for every one of those people for Greeneview School District. What's the difference? Well, if you live in Jamestown, you're not paying the Village of Bowersville's tax rate, you're paying the Village of Jamestown's tax rate. Same thing with the township. You know, you live in Silver Creek Township, this is your tax rate. And those are calculated based on the entire area. So if you were to look at county rates, they're adjusted based on value changes of the entire county. So, everybody good?
Thank you.
Certainly. So we're not going to talk about substitute or incremental levies because Greeneview School District doesn't have any. Know that they exist. If you see them on the ballot in the future, give me a holler, I'll explain them to you. This is just a summary of the different types of levies, but you do have to remember when we go forward, there are different types of levies, and they all act differently. So this is an example that I put together for each levy type. The assumption in this example is that reappraisal increase was 10%. New construction represented 5%. So you can see on the inside millage, your value went up 15% overall. Inside millage saw a 15% increase in tax revenue. Why? Because inside millage is easy. Anybody can calculate that. Fixed sum levies, what happened? Still a 15% increase in value, but what happened is you saw a 13% decrease in the rate so that it still generated that same $500 or $500 a year. Tax rate reduced because that levy didn't need the additional revenue. That rate was set so that it got the same amount of revenue it got in the previous year. Your fixed rate levies, your most popular levy type, again, 15% increase in your value. You saw a 5% increase in your taxes. Why? Because, and these are all proven with mathematical formulas in the background. You saw the 5% increase in your revenue for the subdivision because they had non-reappraisal changes equal to 5%. You saw a 9% decrease in the tax rate because you had a 10% increase in the reappraisal change. So overall, yes, your taxes still went up. Your value went up 15%. Your taxes went up 6%. Okay? Which just proves that just because your value went up 40% doesn't mean your taxes are going up 40%. So this is the one that I think you probably got hit with, sir, is that we've talked about fixed rate and fixed sum levies, and that the rate is kind of calculated or is based on the amount of revenue to be produced, right? But not everybody's value increases by the same percentage. So going back to my countywide levy example, does anybody think that somebody who lives in Bowersville saw the same percentage increase in value as somebody who lives in Beaver Creek? Probably not. They're two different worlds. Now, I will say Bowersville got quite a hefty hit because houses are selling for a lot more there too. First time, normally we have trouble finding enough sales to be representative. And so Bowersville just kind of skates by. It's like, well, I'm not going to increase values based on 2 sales in a village. Well, there were a lot more than 2 sales this time. So because of this different increase, you get treated differently. The best way to do this is an example. So again, we have 2 owners. What did we see? We saw a 10% increase in our value. We could see that the rate was reduced from 2 mils down to 1.8 mils, so that it generated that same $140. But what we see, we saw property owner A had a 14% increase in their value. Their tax increased 4%. Owner B saw a 6% increase in their value. That's less than the average. They actually saw a decrease in their tax, even though their value went up, because their value increased by less than the average. That redistributed who has to pay what portion of that pie, and this is what tax equalization is all about. This is why the Constitution requires that we equalize taxes based on value. And not everybody's value changes by an equal percentage. Are we good? Okay, what are rules without exceptions? So I'm going to skip the first exception because it only occurs in a declining market. And while I know this gentleman is seeing the end of the bubble, but I think it's still a little bit off. Personally, we still have a housing shortage. We still have a lot of jobs coming to Ohio with no place for them to live. So I don't disagree with you. I think there will be an adjustment. I just don't think it would be next year. So the big exception is 20 mil floor. So school districts are guaranteed that all of their current expense levies will collect at 20 mils if they have 20 mils of levies. Okay? That means all this stuff I told you about how, well, if a reappraisal occurs and your value goes up, that tax rate gets reduced so that it generates the same amount of money. That's great unless you create legislation that creates a floor. It says that rate cannot go below this level. We have every school district in Greene County except for one, Bellbrook Sugar Creek, is at the floor. That means those 20 mils of current expense levies, it does not include the permanent improvement inside millage, does not include the bond. You don't have a PI levy either, do you?
No, it's inside.
Yeah. So the only thing, if you had an emergency levy, it wouldn't include that. It is only your voted current expense levies. School district is at the floor, as is every other school district but Bellbrook Sugar Creek. This is the part that drove me nuts. Is I had Carl Keith, the king of media in this area. Now, God bless him, he is a great guy. Going out and saying, don't worry about your value increase. You'll probably only see a 4 to 6% increase in your taxes. If you live in Bellbrook Sugar Creek School District, that's true in Greene County. Where I only have one school district that isn't at the floor, he only has one school district that is at the floor. So the message in Greene County is completely different. That's why you saw the tax increases. So in essence, at this point, when you have reappraisal increases in the districts at the floor, this floor treats that millage like inside millage, and you see the percentage increase, which is why you guys saw such a huge increase in your taxes instead of seeing that 4 to 6% that Auditor Keith was talking about. 20 mil floor, creates, the two levies create $20,000. I come along and do a reappraisal change, I increase values 30%. Inside millage, as you would expect, the revenue increased 30%, but the voted levies also increased 30%. Why? Because that 16 mills could not be reduced, because otherwise that 20 mills would have dropped below the floor, and that can't happen. Okay? Look at year 3. Now I decrease values $100,000 due to reappraisal. Our revenue on inside millage, because it's simple, decreased as we expected. But look at the voted levies. They didn't change. Values went down. When values went up, revenue went up. Well, David, it only makes sense. If values go down, revenue should go down. No, because they created a new guarantee. Those levies are going to generate $20,800 from now until infinity if it doesn't grow some more. What happened? Oh, well, they're no longer at the floor. They're now at 21.33 mils, which means in year 4, if you assume there was another increase in value, that 21.33, or the 17.33 to be specific, would start working its way back down to 16, so they were back at the floor. Did I just confuse the heck out of everybody? All right, ask a question. I'm much better at talking than explaining, maybe. I don't know.
If they're at the floor and the levy don't pass, then what do you do?
There is no passage of a levy. So this is what.
Voted.
Okay, but it's been voted a long time ago.
Okay.
The school district has. I wish I could tell you what the full millage of the school district was, and if I was better prepared, maybe I would have brought it with me. But so we're let's say their actual voted millage could be 25 mills, but it's been reduced down to 16 over the years because House Bill 920, that causes the reduction in that effective tax rate, has worked for all those years, but now it can't work because they're at the floor. It can't go any lower. State law says it cannot go below 20 mills. Okay? So as values are increasing, and where I told you that rate would just work its way down, it can't work any lower than what it is. It's at the floor. So now, if that rate can't go any lower, and values went up, your taxes are going up not only on that inside millage that we're talking about, but on this floor millage. I feel like I just said the exact same thing. I need a question that I can, so I can see where you're at.
I hear are like, for this went up 50%. If my property value went up 50%, does that also mean my taxes are going up equally 50%? Like, what does that look like for this community? Can you explain that? Because a lot of the questions I hear are like, my taxes went up this percentage, that must also, or my property value initiative, does that also mean my taxes are going up? Can you explain what that?
Let's try this and see if this kind of ties it all together. May or may not. We may have to come back and visit that as a separate question. But you can see inside millage, in this case, represents 19% of the total millage in taxing district J27. Ignore that it says Xenia City there. Obviously, I did not do a good enough job of proofing my own presentation. It's actually Jamestown Village. So what does that mean? If your value goes up 30%, only 10% or 20% of your tax rate is directly tied to value change. So 30% times, I'm going to round that off to 20% if everybody's good with that. What happens? You see a 6% increase in your taxes because your value went up 30%. Now, there are people who, believe me, are going to complain, well, why my value or taxes go up 6%? And I'm going to argue, hey, that's the cost of doing business. That's normal inflationary, that's less than inflationary increases. Okay, that's 2% per year because we only do this every 3 years. So, I understand nobody wants to pay more taxes, but a 6% increase over a 3-year period without voting on an additional levy, I'm going to tell you, hey, you got to kind of suck that one up. But look what happens when we bring the floor in. Trying to figure out, okay, never mind, that's right. So now 57% of your levies are directly correlated with value changes when a reappraisal change occurs. because of that floor. We went from 19 to 57. Now, look at that same 30% increase, and I actually worked the math out on this one. I thought I worked the math out on this one. Oh, so you would get a 17% increase in your taxes. In essence, 57% times, or 0.57 times 0.3 works out to be a 17% increase in your tax bill. That's assuming you went up by the average, which was 30%. If you went up 48%, you got hurt worse. So this is why you see that increase and why that floor is so important to what is, here I am at a school talking on behalf, the school invited me here, but this is what the schools are going to get. They're the ones who have the floor. School districts have a 20 mil floor, the vocational schools have a 2 mil floor. They're the ones who are going to see, not the majority of this increase. Now, everybody who got inside millage is going to get an increase in their revenue. County has 2.5 mils of the inside millage. We will see an increase in our revenue from that 2.5 mils. But that 2.5 mils is a relatively small portion of the total millage of 53 mils in the village of Jamestown. Did that tie it together a little bit?
A little, yeah.
Okay, go back into your question then.
I mean, yeah, it kind of makes sense. So if my property value went up 50%, then I take, I don't know, no, I
It
guess.
doesn't work for an individual property. So remember, we're talking, rates are set based on the amount of revenue they are to generate, right? Can we go back to that concept that when a reappraisal change occurs, it's not a reappraisal change on your property, it's a reappraisal change on all the properties in Greeneview School District. That's how those rates are determined, okay? So when you look at it as my property, and the reason the looking at an individual property doesn't work is because we go back to taxes are relative. If your value went up by more than the average, you're going to get hurt disproportionately because you saw a larger increase than what the average. If everybody increased the average, then we would go back to, yes, you could look at an individual property, but you can't.
On the school tax?
On the school tax.
Well, right here it says, like the one they're wanting to do is $11.07 per month per $100,000. So if my house went up $200,000, that's affecting that school tax just on my property.
So I am not talking
There's
anything
separate levy.
about their levy on the ballot. And I'll be quite honest, that was not my goal. My goal was to help people understand property
I'm just
taxes.
using as an example, but it does, these property increases does change.
Oh, yeah, but you get to vote on that one. So guess what? Bellbrook Sugar Creek School District, our only school district not at the floor, had a major fight with their constituents to pass a 5.5 mil levy, I think is what it was, caused a 15% increase in their taxes. That didn't bother me. And I'm not going to say the floor bothers me either, but guess what? Those voters voted on it. If they have to pay it, I don't care how you voted, majority rules, and it was voted on. These are unvoted tax increases because of these floors, and that's where my problem comes, is because I understand why people are frustrated. I get it. I mean, it's not like I'm immune to it. I've lived in my house for 26 years, 27 years, and my taxes have more than tripled over that period of time. It's not like I'm immune to this.
Mine's done that in 10 years.
So, I mean, I get the frustration, but this is where I go back to focusing on value being the problem is less of where I think we need to place our energy, and we need to come up with new ideas to solve the tax problem. Now, anybody who's understood enough about what I've said with the 20 mil floor, how many people in this room think, well, David, the answer's easy, get rid of the 20 mil floor? Anybody? Nobody raising their hand?
Sure, why not?
I'm going to tell you, it's the easiest solution, but it messes with school funding because school funding assumes that every school district gets 20 mills. And their funding of the school is based on that 20 mills. So if the school district's not getting 20 mills and the state's shorting you 20 mills, guess what? The school district's going to go bankrupt because they're losing money on both sides now. Well, they're not losing on they're not losing on the property tax. They're being held level, but they are losing on the school funding from the state. So, this is where I always say, this is why the problem is so complex, is that it's not just solving the floor problem, because it opens up another problem. School funding needs fixed. We need to find a way to pay for schools, and maybe it's the state needs to pony up more money, or maybe it's we need to find different ways other than property taxes. Yes, we have income taxes, but they're almost as big of the devil as what property taxes are nowadays.
Gee, the lottery was going to fix that problem.
Well, yeah, until we learn how to go, oh, yeah, you can have this for that. There you go, everything's even. Good job. All right?
Yep.
Okay, are we good to move on? Because I'm here, I want to make sure I
Back
get
to your, so 50%, 57% of my tax, is that what that means? 57% of my taxes going to the school center?
No, that is not what that means.
So
We'll
help me
get to a slide here in a
understand
minute.
those
That
percentage
means
numbers.
57% of your tax rates are directly correlated with value changes when reappraisal increases occur. So
Okay, say that again.
57% of your levies that you pay are directly correlated with value changes when reappraisal increases occur. So, and go back to, what was it when we just looked at inside village? It was 19 mils, or 19%. So, if your value increased 30%, only 19% of that increase of your levies would increase as a result of that. So you saw a 6% increase in your taxes because values went up 30% and your value happened to go up 30% and 19% of those levies are directly correlated. But when you add the floor, now 57% of the levies are directly correlated. So now that 30% increase, you have to multiply by 57% to get the percentage increase that you would see in your taxes. Assuming you went up by that average 30%, which we know everybody's value didn't go up by the same percentage. We good? I feel like a used car salesman at this point.
Clear as mud.
All right, so we've already talked about how the floor impacts taxes. So legislators, for the first time in my 20-year career in the County Auditors Association, are listening to auditors finally. Mr. Fudge, you're going to listen to me when I talk to you about property taxes, right?
I listen to you about everything you say, David.
I wouldn't listen to everything I said. Inga's known me long enough to know that's not a good idea. 65% of our school districts in the state of Ohio are at the floor. We're not, Greene County's not an anomaly. Montgomery County's the anomaly, only having one school district. 20% of our school districts, or 24% of our school districts are within 20% of the floor. Well, if values increase 30%, wow, guess what? They're at the floor. This is a big problem. The other obvious issue is that prior to 2008, when we saw the market decrease, seeing 10, maybe 12% increases in values during a reappraisal cycle was considered pretty big. 30% was unheard of, at least in Ohio. I'm not saying, Vegas, Florida, yeah, they get that. That's, they live in la-la land as far as I'm concerned. But in Ohio, we haven't seen these types of increases. Our system wasn't built to deal with it. We did not envision 30% increases in the impact it would have on our taxpayers. And so now we're scurrying trying to find solutions. So, what are the solutions? Now, you've heard me say over and over again, it's not a value problem, it's a tax problem. But state legislators introduced House Bill 187, which would have told auditors, and well, actually told the Department of Taxation, who issues orders to auditors, you no longer use sales from the most recent year, you use the average of sales over a 3-year period. Sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? I agree, it does not. Yes, sir?
Yeah, wouldn't that hurt us on the downside?
It absolutely would. County auditors came out opposed to this legislation. They put it in the budget bill at the last minute. And auditor said, no, 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 and somehow had the power to get it pulled. I did not know our association had that kind of power. We've taken it out for a couple of spins. Since then, it doesn't work nearly as well. But that is a bad idea, A, because an appraisal, opinion of value, or appraisal is an opinion of value at a point in time, not an average over a period of time. And if you're in a declining market, I'm increasing your value in a declining market. Not a good idea. I can't even defend that. We could completely change our state constitution and do away with equalization and do what Michigan does. Let's just chase sales. You paid $500,000 for that house, pay taxes on $500,000. That person's lived in this house for 20 years. They're paying what they paid for the house when they bought it 20 years ago, plus an inflationary index each year. Kills equalization. Makes my job so much easier. I don't have to argue with people about that value anymore. Is that what you paid? Yeah, well, sorry. Is that what you paid times 3%? Yeah, well, okay, sorry. So when we talk about values aren't the problem, that is a solution that does attack the value issue. It has other detriments. Am I ever going to sell my house? Probably not. I mean, I'm paying a lot less in taxes than if I sell it. You know, I pay next to nothing because I'm just getting this index increase every year. I'm making out like a bandit. I'm going to use it as a rental property. Wow, we already have a housing shortage. Did I just make that problem worse? Yeah, probably. Change the floor, eliminate the floor, reduce the floor. I mean, this is one of my favorites, is arguing with other auditors. Well, why don't we just reduce the floor? Okay, let's kick the can so that the next time we see a 30% increase, we can deal with this issue all over again. Let's find a real solution now. This is my favorite of the solutions, is it doesn't eliminate the floor, but what it does is it caps the increase in revenue on that voted fixed rate millage subject to the floor at 16 mills, so that it can only increase by an indexed amount. So the school districts do get more money, but they don't get the cash windfall. It's my favorite solution. Unfortunately, it is also unconstitutional. You know, and you can tell I'm a guy who just likes to get things done. I'm like, well, isn't something only unconstitutional if it's challenged? Legislators don't look at it. It seems reasonable to me. So we also have the solution, state money. Everything from refundable income tax credits for property tax increases. State legislators, at least Republican legislators, want to eliminate income tax altogether. Hey, here's a way that without eliminating income tax, but you can still provide tax relief to those people being hurt the most by these tax increases at the local level. And guess what? We're struggling at the local level because of decisions being made by the state legislators. Local governments took a 50% cut in local government funding. Oh, it's probably been 10 years ago. Pardon me?
Kasich.
Yes. You know, that hurt. That hurt a lot of local governments, but we knew the state was hurting too, and you know, we're all in this together. So this last budget bill, state legislators finally said, look, we've heard you long enough, so we're going to increase the percentage that you get from the state sales tax to increase your local government funding. But then they cut the income tax so that we still saw a 5% decrease in our local government funding this year. I mean, you know, these are the things. When you cut off funding that local governments had received for years, personal property tax, it's a terrible tax. It should have been eliminated. Don't get me wrong. But the state eliminated personal property tax, which was money that came to local governments, and replaced it with the commercial activity tax, which is a tax that goes to the state government. And when you try to argue with the legislator and say, you stole our money. No, that's a whole new tax. What are you talking about? We just eliminated that. This wasn't a replacement. And you know, it's these cuts over time that have caused local governments to have to come back to taxpayers over and over and over again and say, look, I can't run. Fire departments are probably the best example right now. Try to run a volunteer fire department right now. You have to have staffing. Staffing costs money. You know, we've got a number of issues: fully fund non-business credits, restructure tax credits, and I'm happy to discuss these in a little more detail. Some of the programs that have been mentioned: 70 for 70. If you're over the age of 70 and lived in your house for 10 years, 20 years, I can't remember exactly what it was, and your Ohio adjusted gross income is less than $70,000, your taxes are frozen. They will not go up. Now, I think in terms of providing relief to some of our most vulnerable citizens, our elderly, I support that. I have a problem with it from a philosophical standpoint that, are they going to get to vote tax increases for me and not pay them? Are they going to get to vote yes on every levy? And, oh, it doesn't impact me. So the 70 for 70 plan, I think, is a good starting point. It's a great discussion point. The way it is now, I don't think it can go forward.
Doesn't do anything for me between the Social Security I get and I'm coming up to required minimum disbursements from my 401ks and other investments. It's going to drive me up. Even if I roll them over, it's still taxable income. I'm screwed. Again.
So,
oh well.
And then there is a program that's been discussed, you know, going back to your point, not capping the value, but capping the tax increase that can occur. So you talked about, is there any cap that is placed on you as to how much value can increase? No. But there have been legislative issues brought up that would cap the amount of tax that could be increased without a vote. So, you know, going back, again, it kind of eliminates the equalization. But, you know, it's one of those, right now, I say there are no bad plans. We know we have a problem. We need as many ideas as we can get so that we can come up with a logical way to solve this problem. And I always kind of joke, I said, I'm an accountant. I was born to be an accountant. I'm not the guy who's going to think outside the box. It's people that come to me and say, hey, this is a good idea. What if we tried this? What could we do that? And you know, when you take bits and pieces from a lot of different plans, there is no silver bullet. There is no one solution that's going to solve our tax problem. But a combination of multiple solutions is what we need in order to move forward. Yes?
Well, I think or whoever does this, I mean, years ago, Greeneview closed school for a day to go picket at the Capitol about school millage. They called it the millage village. And the kids got a day off of school and I took the kids down to see the protest and what it was about, but nothing really changed. Do they have a true, instead of just kicking it down the road, are they really trying to look for a solution? Back then, I wasn't retired and on fixed income. So you're also going, oh, wait a minute, they do need to come. I mean, is somebody truly trying to change the tax issue?
So,
Or do you talk to about, are you really, really trying to change, or is it all lip service?
I've taken enough shots at legislators.
I
Don't throw me a
represent
softball. Ultimately, here's what I'm going to say. In the budget bill, while they stripped out the 3-year average, they did include a legislation introduced by a Democrat within the budget process that said you need to create a property tax review and study. And they did that. Now, have I seen a lot of things be studied and reviewed and then put on a shelf? Yes. But we have legislators who are pushing hard, saying we have to solve this problem. And the 3-year average is still one of their favorites. That's where we have to get to them and say, the simple, the shiny toy is not always the one you want to grab at. I agree. In this cycle, it solves the problem. The next cycle, it may cause a problem. So let's look at it deeper. County auditors have been invited to testify before this joint committee, and we'll be doing that on Wednesday at 10 a.m. And so if anybody wants to watch the Ohio channel, Wednesday at 10 a.m., you can see some of my colleagues testify before this committee. We are working hard. We do have the ear of legislators, and we have 3 legislators who are former county auditors, including the Speaker of the House.
I was going to say, Dave, I'm only a candidate. I'm on this time, but I talked to the speaker, and this is one of his primary issues. That he's like, you can think about this. That's why Dave and I bet about this. It's a complex problem, but he's actually thinking about how do we fix this, especially for people who are retired.
Does any state or, okay, within Ohio, is any county handling it in a much better way than what we'll know because they're all following states? So is there another state that you could like, hey, this seems to be working?
Yeah, so there are, I mean, the states everybody always wants to point to. Look at what Florida's doing, look at what Texas is doing, and look at what Carolinas are doing, and you're like, wait a minute. We don't have beach, we don't have sun, 12 months. Let's bring it back to reality. Now, people like to focus on Tennessee as well, which I love to focus on. I love Tennessee. But guess what? You pay sales tax. You pay a higher sales tax, and you pay it on every single thing that you buy. Milk, food, whatever it is, you're paying sales tax on it. So I've always argued that the best tax structure is not to eliminate any particular one. It's to find the right blend of what works best for your community. But guess what? In the state of Ohio, because I'm a creature of statute, I don't exist if legislators don't create me or keep me. One size has to fit all. And that's the problem we have, is all of our legislation pretends that Greeneview School District has the exact same problems as Columbus City School District. Oh, you guys need, metal detectors? Well, we can get you 30 metal detectors. Well, I only have 2 entrances to the building. Well, it doesn't matter, These are the things that one size, but when you're a creature of statute, this is what happens. Anybody got any great solutions for me to take back so I sound brilliant when I talk to my colleagues? Okay, this gentleman first.
Well, no, I have a different question, so.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Well, it's not a great solution, of course, but I'm wondering, what is wrong with looking at a sales tax that everybody would pay, and the owners would not be on the property?
So I think that is a good solution if the state were willing to either have a dedicated sales tax or a dedicated income tax. I really don't care which one, but have a dedicated tax to fund schools adequately. How do we know they're not going to pull the old switcheroo like they did with the lottery money and say, well, we used to give you this money, but now we're giving you this money? I don't know. But I think it's a legitimate solution.
For something where everybody would have a dog in the fight, and not just the property owner.
Yeah, and I know nobody here feels sorry for Beaver Creek, but I'm going to talk about Beaver Creek for just a minute. So the state comes up with what its share, or what its share of educating every child should be in the state of Ohio. Beaver Creek City School District is a wealthy school district by any measurement. Income, value, all of these things are off the charts. They get 5% of what the state says their share of the cost of educating a kid should be. Cedar Cliff Local School District, I didn't look up Greeneview, I'm sorry, So Cedar Cliff Local School District gets 65% of what the state says it should cost to educate its students. Why? Their values are low because of CAUV. They're, they're,
I don't know where that came from, video.
I thought you were just getting a little friendly with me, Larry. And their incomes are low because farmers don't make a profit. So, you know, they're getting a larger percentage, which is fine, I get that. But in my simple mind, if the state says it costs $10,000 a year to educate the kid, and the state's responsibility is 60% of that, then the math is pretty easy. Your average daily membership times the cost to educate a kid times 60%, and that's the check the state should be sending you. Now, if it takes an income tax or a sales tax dedicated to this to fund that program, it makes perfect sense.
This is where our state legislature comes in.
Bob, you listening?
I'm listening.
All right.
I spoke to the governor about this, and his eyes blazed over, well, waiting my breath there, so.
There's no stomach for a tax increase. That's part of the problem we run into, is the state has more money than what it knows what to do with right now. That's part of the problem. But they know that this is a short-term problem that they have, and that they don't want to commit to something long-term that they can't afford. And so this is kind of, I believe you had a question too, sir? Or was somebody over on this side did?
Well, I was like using Michael's example, what they do. Because their property taxes, well, so I don't know if they're using sales tax, I don't know what they do down there. They got nice schools, they got nice roads, far more than what we have up here. And then, you know, like my cousin owns 200 acres and pays about $200 a year. So it's way different.
Yeah, I mean, and
Now they pay property tax on their vehicles and so forth and so forth. But compared to someone paying $8,000 a year in property tax, they don't pay a fourth of that.
and I wish I had.
So whatever they're doing is working.
And I'm sure part of the study committee is going to deal with how other states have gone away from funding schools primarily through property tax. And I'm not going to skip that next hand I saw around. Oh. So, well, there's supposed to be percentages on it. This is a grid. Don't know what it represents anymore because none of the labels came out. The biggest one down there, that's what goes to the school district. Okay, so 45% of your tax dollars go to Greeneview School District. Silver Creek Township gets 8%. Somebody had this longer version.
I can't see it either.
Greene County gets 19%. Now remember, within Greene County, that includes the development of disabilities, children's services, library, hospital, all of those special levies that have been produced. It's not all county general fund. The Career Center gets 6% and the village gets 22%. So, and somebody else had saw a hand. You.
Well, okay. I'm across the street from the low income. I share a drive. I'm on the lake. But like when they come in, after my husband died, I was like, okay, I need to get a handle on what I have. They couldn't find it comparable because I have a log home. And so when you get a weird place and then it goes up, and again, my goal is to continue living here until they cart me out. But just because somebody's crazy enough to pay a stupid amount of money to live in our life, and I do love our neighborhood, it does feel like you're being penalized, especially after previously in the office. And it's like, well, why are you complaining? Do you know what, real life prices are?
And I don't even care what the price of. You know what? Our focus, that would have been a completely inappropriate question in my mind. My staff hopefully would never ask that question because ultimately I don't care what property in Lake Erie, Lake Cumberland, or on the ocean sells for. We're in Greene County and these are the values. But I do care what your neighbors are paying because they are setting the market. I get that you have a unique house. Unique houses are different, more difficult. But it doesn't mean your value didn't increase. And with the triennial update where we apply that same percentage to, in essence, all properties. We say, well, that's not true, David. My neighbor's property value went up 35%, mine went up 32%. It's because we did land
all
and
the
building
neighbors were
difference.
calling and, it was all varied and that's all well and fine, but is there a stopping point at some point so that people that are on fixed incomes don't get priced out? I mean, truthfully, before I retired, I sort of kept track of that, but it didn't hit as hard until.
So there are expanded homestead programs capping tax increases like the 70 for 70 program. There are a number of tax programs that are designed specifically for those people who qualify for homestead, over the age of 65 or permanently disabled, and have an Ohio adjusted gross income below a certain level. And there's always talk about, look, we need to increase the exemption amount, we need to increase the income amount. My problem is even though that's a part of the solution, and not one I disagree with, we have single moms who own homes who are also struggling that don't qualify for homestead. That's why taking, when they say, well, if we address homestead, that's fine. You address part of the problem.
Right.
Like, there is no silver bullet. There is no single answer. We have this issue over here.
Do you feel like the people in the tax department are taking this seriously? Or is it just, are we all just spinning our wheels and it's going to be what it does?
Again, if you're not trying, then I guess my question is, are you trying to solve the problem or are you just giving lip service to the problem? I mean, we can yell at legislators all we want about. This has been an ongoing problem. This problem existed prior to the recession. Prior to the recession, all our school districts were at the 20 floor, except for Bellbrook Sugar Creek. This is a problem that didn't just pop up.
Right.
But right now, we have the attention of legislators. And legislators are saying, okay, so far they've had the Department of Taxation come in, they've had LSC, they basically score all the bills that are being and explain the process. Legislative Services Commission, thank you, I drew a blank on it. They've testified. County auditors are coming to testify. Board of Tax Appeals is coming to testify. So they're going to at least have heard enough. And as an association, I'm going to tell you, county auditors will continue to push that issue.
Okay.
So,
And you get to re-educate 30% of the legislature.
that's, term limits were not necessarily a good thing. Sorry, Bob.
Everybody likes them, but yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you lost a lot of historical knowledge. So we saw, never mind, Bill Sykes. You can say whatever, you like him, you hate him, whatever, but he knew how the place operated. He knows that he's termed out this time, this is his time, and not running again. And, it was one of those, he would tell a legislator, yeah, sounds like a great idea. We thought it 20 years ago too, and it didn't work then, it's not going to work now, so.
Yeah, okay, for a long time, people in Bird Rock had that kind of, historical knowledge. I've been going to Columbus a long time to re-educate legislators on what my issues are.
Yes, sir.
Did you have a change in the homestead deduction?
Yes, so every year, the income level increases based on an index. In this case, for the first time in the budget bill, legislators included an increase in the amount of homestead. So it's been $25,000 since the Kasich administration changed homestead, blah, blah, blah. We can go through a long history of what the homestead program actually is before Kasich. It was before Kasich. No. Democrat. Yes, Strickland. So since Strickland created the $25,000, it stayed frozen at $25,000. For the first time, they are now increasing that by the same index that they're increasing the income level by. Problem is that increase in the exemption amount going from $25,000 to $26,200 is 7%, something like that. Its values went up 30%. It didn't keep up. So you still lost ground.
My homestead number is lower, even though taxes went up 2,000, my homestead exemption is less than what it was last year.
I will
So
do-
how does it come about that
So,
I'm paying?
so if you think, let's go back to the way it was before they actually increased it. My mother had the same thing. So guess what happens? Her exemption amount was $25,000, never changed. As values go up, what happens? Her tax rate, the tax rate, effective tax rate gets reduced. So that reduced tax rate is now applied to that $25,000, providing less benefit even though her value went up. We finally got, the speaker, Jason Stevens, is the one who pointed this issue out in the last term, got it in the budget bill, got it approved. What's the problem is that 30% increase in value and a 7% increase in the homestead amount. It doesn't equate. So you still end up losing ground, though the thought was, the legislator position was the appropriate position. It just is a bad time to do it because you're still losing ground, but you didn't lose as much ground as you would have lost had they left it at 25 instead of 26. Told you I sound like a used car salesman at this point. Oh. All right. So tax credits, hopefully everybody's got this. Look at your tax bill. Owner occupancy credit, you do have to apply for it. Homestead, over the age 65, permanently disabled, Ohio adjusted gross income less than $38,600. That's not per individual, that would be for husband and wife. So, you know, you can't just look at one of your incomes, even if you file separately. Exempts first $26,200 of value where your taxes go. Board of revision, disagree with your value. There's a formal complaint process you can go through. We did the informal reviews. I know it didn't go as well as I would have liked for it to have gone, but you still have that formal complaint process. It's a one-page form. Information on our website about how to contest your value. A ton of data. I got really smart people that work for me that let you look at sales, let you look at square footage, let you compare your property to similar properties to yours. I encourage you, utilize this. Your value is personal to you. It is not to me. Okay? I'm not here to defend our values. I don't know. I've never seen your property. I have no idea what it should be appraised at. But I'm going to tell you, I will give you a fair listen as long as you don't come in and call me names. Okay? Yeah, people think it works. I have yet to figure that out. But they think it works. And you know, be ready to have a real discussion. There's no, you know, my mother's comment, there's no way my house would sell for $133,000. What kind of kid did I raise? Well, Mom, your house would sell for $160 all day, every day. For the most part, my values are still lower than what these properties would sell for. That's done intentionally. Again, it's a statistical approach to valuing property. If I shoot for 100%, I have just as many people overappraised as underappraised. People are overappraised, yell at me. I don't like being yelled at. So what do we shoot for? We shoot for that 93, 95, somewhere in that range is where my goal is, so that I have more people underappraised than overappraised. But we're still going to have those mistakes out there. That's what this process is for. Appeal. Come talk to us. We're here to help you, honest. Yes, sir.
Did you have a number of people come after October to do the appeal process with you?
Yes, absolutely. We we actually extended the process for a week and still ended up running out of space, but I have to have my abstract into Columbus by October 31st, so at some point we have to say, we're done.
All right, so out of, gee whiz, out of the number of people that come in and applied or tried to do that, what was the percentage that kind of won a reduction?
Dayton Daily News asked me the same question. I said, I have no idea because each case is individual and sometimes it's just based on what information they provided us. If my mother would have come in and filed an informal complaint and said, no way my value could have gone up by this amount, she would have gotten a no change. If she'd have brought in comps of properties similar to hers that sold in the area, she may have gotten a value adjustment. You know, I refuse, and I'll be quite honest, half of our informal complaints were nothing more, why did I get this letter? And you're like, okay, we've got a 15-minute session booked for you to ask a question that was explained in the letter. You know, you're taking up valuable, I can't rebook that 15-minute session. You know, that's kind of 15 minutes that somebody else doesn't get that had a legitimate complaint. But I don't know. I'm going to tell you, I review, if you file a formal complaint, my chief appraiser reviews every one of them, and I review every one of them, and we present them to the board. Even when we disagree, we both present our side to the board of revision, which is made up of myself, representative from the commissioner's office and the county treasurer. I always say it's kind of funny, so you bring your appeal to the tax assessor, the tax biller, and the tax spender. But guess what? Even if you think this process is rigged, you can go to the Ohio Board of Tax Appeals, and they're completely independent. They're in Columbus, and they tend not to even like me because I don't care much for them either. So it's a valuable process. You know, this is your right. There is no statutory obligation to have an informal review period. That's something most auditors do just because it's the right thing to do. The formal complaint process is your right. You have a right to file that valuation complaint. But be prepared to provide evidence. Don't just, you know, there's no way my value could have gone up by this percentage. Condition issues are always one of the things that we don't get inside the house. I don't know what the interior of your house was. Even, you know, I joke that we always talk about the 1960s powder pink, powder purple, powder yellow, all those different colors. But think about the people in the 1980s who thought hunter green kitchen countertops were so cool. Wow, those got dated really quick. So, you know, it doesn't hurt to try. You won't get punished for trying. Just please don't offend us while you're trying. Anything else? I thank you all so much. I apologize for taking up so much of your time. I won't even get home by my bedtime now. So,
And thank you for coming this evening to learn more about it. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Mrs. Fisher, our treasurer here, I didn't introduce her at the beginning, but also if you have specific questions, even as we move toward the bond issue on March 19th, she can certainly answer those related specifically to your property or to your taxes as well. So have a good evening. Again, thank you. Mr. Graham, thank you.
certainly. Sorry I went so long.
Oh, it's fine.